This video is sponsored by Tourbox. This is probably one of my more ambitious projects since I started using grease pencil. I've been really into fantasy RPGs all my life, so it was about time I did a tavern scene. There are 8 characters in total in this animation. We have some little guys in a beer mug and eating blueberries. You might recognise the design from this Blender animation loop. Then there's a sleeping adventurer, the barmaid and a fawn, and then at the back of the room a magic cat is giving a crystal ball reading to a knight. I started with a very rough sketch that I then cleaned up on a live stream. Though this was done in TVPaint 11 Pro, you can use your favourite art program to design the scene you want to animate. This is the Tourbox Elite. It was sent to me for an honest review, and I've been using it with my personal and freelance animation projects for a good couple of months. And you'll see a lot more of it in my videos, because it has become a regular part of my process. For TVPaint, I've set up my shortcuts to mirror what I had on my keyboard, and it was a surprisingly easy switch. It took only a day or so to build that muscle memory and find a new placement for playing the animation, skipping to keyframes, and scrubbing through the timeline. As I work on more projects, these might change a little, but it's so easy to remap everything that I'm looking forward to finding more shortcuts to include soon. If I need a reminder of what I've added, there's always the general HUD or the D-pad HUD, and I can add and move them on my screen to show the actions and commands. Moving on to Blender, I opened a new 2D animation canvas and imported my design by going to Object Mode, Add, Image, Reference. I then scaled the image up to fit the camera and went to the Data tab to lower the opacity to make it easier to draw and animate over the top. I wanted each section to be its own grease pencil so I could arrange them all in object mode at different distances from the camera. Normally I would make a coloured style frame before I animate, but by using the materials in Blender, I can always switch the colours whenever I like. So I started filling in the table, the blueberry bowl and the mug. In object mode, I went to Add, Grease Pencil, Blank, to start on the table for the sleeping adventurer. I then did the same again for the bar, the shelves behind it, 2 sections of stone wall, the floor, curtains and the crystal ball at the back. Normally I'd keep all of these planes flat and facing the camera. This time I arranged them in 3D space. Rather than moving the camera back and forth in one direction, I plan to add in a little rotation and hopefully it will go well. We'll see. At this point I was starting to realise just how big my small project was, and while I love animation, it is a tedious process. So any shortcut or way I can speed it up, I will do it. My toolbox setup for Blender has changed a lot since I first started using it. One of the first things I did was enabled an add-on to set a single button to open this panel, which made accessing the different modes and tools much easier, leaving me a lot more options with the rest of the toolbox to set up for jumping between keyframes, toggling the erase, brush stabilizer, and I have this wheel to increase or decrease the brush size. If you want to take a look at my full review of the Tourbox Elite or find out more on their website, head to the links in the description. Now with the background ready to go, I started with the rough animation for my berry boys, and my rough animation is really rough. In the last couple of years, I've actually turned the pen pressure off my brushes for rough and clean line work because it helps my design look more consistent when it's moving. If I use pen pressure, there's often a wiggle or unfinished look to it that I'm not so keen on, so that's why I mostly set the strength of my brushes to 100% without pen pressure. In sculpt mode, I will use the pull and push tools as much as I can to add subtle bounces that help me save time that I would have spent redrawing or selecting and moving different parts of the design in edit mode. Now, because this is going to be an animation made up of lots of individual loops, I attempted to use the time offset modifier. But Blender was having a moment and decided no matter what, it didn't like the modifiers, so I had to do things the long way by selecting the frames and using a shortcut to duplicate and move them across the timeline. These little guys are very simple, but because they'll loop and there's going to be so much other stuff in the scene, I don't want to make it too detailed. The more time I spend on something, the more detailed and difficult I will make it. The guy in the mug was just going to relax and breathe, but then I adjusted it to have him pop up, lean on the edge, and then fall back into the beer. At this point, I'm pleased with how it looks and plays. So the next step was to line it. I tend to think ahead and in what order the layers will be for each character, and what needs to be behind or in front of certain objects, just so I don't have to mess about with too many masks or corrections later. The little guy on the left eating the blueberries was split into 2 different layers. One for the head and everything that was above the bowl, and another for everything that would be behind it when he ate. Because these were very simple loops, I could just select and duplicate the finished frames across the timeline in a reverse order to get them back to the starting pose and complete the loop. Once I was happy with the line work, it was time to colour. And remembering all of Blender's colouring quirks is an interesting process. My top tips for colouring is to turn everything off that you don't need, so you're focused on the layers that you want to fill. If you don't turn them off and they're in the same grease pencil object, Blender will also use the lines behind or in front of as a guide, and when you turn them off it won't have filled in behind them and it will leave you with gaps. Secondly, if it's a pretty similar shape or area you're filling, I'd recommend using the multi-frame tool and selecting your keyframes in the timeline. Just remember to deselect your frames and turn them off when you're done. I had a couple of moments in this where I had to use the multi-frame to erase stuff I'd done accidentally, and then refill, and then turn off the function. Thirdly, the fill tool isn't always 100% accurate, so there were times I had to use the draw tool and a fill material to catch the smaller areas that escaped the flood fill. Fourthly, if you're working in a single grease pencil object like this, whether it's drawing or colouring or using sculpt mode, and you only want to affect the layer you're working on, check this box, as without it you'll affect all your layers within the grease pencil object. And that's how I animated and coloured these little guys. There's quite a bit left to do, including lots of jars that will have to fill these shelves, the rest of the character animations, textures and masks and lighting, a little camera move in there too. So more videos on this as I finish them. When the animation is complete, I'll be sharing the file in the description. So until then, subscribe, let me know what you want to see in the comments, and I will be back with another video real soon. Bye!